Hello everyone, this is John from Nickman Gaming, and today I am going to talk about how to load an image from a URL into a Unity project with a progress bar as well. I will actually be using this in an upcoming project that I will be making, which will be a study helper. I'm not going to give away too many details, but I'll still talk about how I do it. Now we can see that my editor version of Unity will be 2021.3.14F1, the long-term service, and I will be creating this as a 2D game. My project name, I will call it load URL or load image from URL. It will be put into my base folder. I'm creating the project now. And while it's creating, let me just tell you about what it will do. So we will have an input field where we will enter the URL from a website. Which website or URL, it doesn't matter. I will even show you how to grab an image from the internet. We will also have an area to display the image. We will give it a ratio to display the image within. And we will have a loading bar. I'll even go over how to create that or download it. I'll be using Photoshop to create the image. I'm sure we can even use Paint or any other image manipulation, or you can easily download it from the internet as well, because all we need is any image. We might even use one of the default Unity images. And then finally, when our input field is done being typed into, we will begin to load the texture or load the image as a texture, and then we place the texture into the image. And that's how it goes. The project is still building, so I'll be back when it's done. Alright, it looks like my Unity has finished opening and creating the project. Just to let you know, this is a vanilla installation of Unity. I have not opened it yet on this machine. So as long as you have a vanilla installation of Unity 2021.3.14F1 Personal, it should look exactly like mine. And if you've edited your Unity, then you should know enough to understand what's going on. Now, the first thing we want to do is I want to create a script. So I'll go here, I'll create a folder which I will call scripts, and then I will load the scripts and I will create a C# script. If you don't know this, you can right click in the folder area and go up to create and then C# script. I believe you can also do assets, create and then C# script, which I will name load image from with an M URL script. Now I'm going to open this in Visual Studios, and it may take a while, so I'll see you when it's open. Okay, so we're back and we have our Visual Studio Code open. I did actually have to take quite a long break because, as I said, this is a vanilla installation of Unity, and I had to make sure that my Visual Studio Code was showing the Unity shortcuts to make it easier for typing. And to do that, I had to go to Edit, Preferences, External Tools, and where it says External Script Editor, I had to set Visual Studio Code. Then I followed a few of the links that it gave me to install some of the libraries, and finally I had to reset my computer, and now everything is working as expected. So now let's get started. I have my load image from URL script open. I like to start with the script and then go into the editor to update the scene, because you need the script to update the scene, and sometimes I do the scene and then the script and then the scene again, just so I can kind of imagine things, but I've already got things laid out and I'm just talking in circles. Okay. So the first thing we need is we need an image to place the loaded image. So I will do serialize field by typing SF, and make sure that you have these square brackets too. Serialize field means that it is a private variable that you can edit in the editor. It's very similar to public, except a serialized field cannot be edited outside of this class. If you don't understand that at this moment, that's perfectly fine, as long as you know about them. When I first started with Unity many years back, I saw everyone using public or private, and only one person using serialized field, but he never explained it. So that's all it is. Serialized field is a private variable that cannot be accessed outside of this class, but it can be accessed in the Unity editor. So we want a serialized field image, which we don't have the library for referenced yet. So I will press space and it will give me the wrong one. I will press Control Z to undo. I'll press space again, and I'm going to call this the place image on load. Okay, so now we have the red squiggly line under image, and this shows us that the type or namespace of image cannot be found, meaning we need a reference to the library that tells the computer what an image is and how does it handle it. In Visual Studio, you can just right-click and it will bring you to the shortcut, but this is Visual Studio Code that Unity 2021 installed on my machine, and it's not as good as Visual Studio when dealing with Unity scripts. But I'm just going with a vanilla installation, and I can use the shortcut anyways because I want to access Quick Fix, which is Control plus the period key. So Control and period, and now I have what you would see in Visual Studios. And it says, hey, these are all of the things that you can use to fix this unknown image. What we actually want is using UnityEngine.UI, semicolon. And I will left click that, and we can see that it added the library up here. And now there's no problem with image. The Unity Engine UI, as you may have guessed, it's for all UI things. I could also do UI.image because I have Unity Engine, but at least I should be able to. Let's see. Okay, I would have to do the full name of UnityEngine.UI.image if I didn't want to include this namespace up here. But I like it short and sweet. So now we have an image. Another thing is we need to resize the image because the canvas that we will show everything on, say my phone screen, is only going to be a certain size, say 1080 pixels wide by 1920 pixels high, or whatever resolution my screen is. Maybe it's 16 by 9. There are too many to know. But we know that we want to put an image on that screen. So we will need to not just go with the default image size. And we also don't want to give it a weird squeeze into it, so we need to resize the image dynamically as we go along, also based on the phone. So For that, we want the rect transform, and this allows us to resize the image on our canvas, which you will find out later if you do not know about it. So again, a serialized field and rect transform, and then I will call this the image rect. Again, these names, for the first time, these names do not mean anything. They are just for you. Now, we also want a desired width and height. So what is the maximum size that you want this image to be? You can set that as 1/2 of the screen size. You can set it to a solid number. You can do whatever you want. For me, I will do serialize field int, and I will call this desired width, and then I'm going to do another one which I will call desired height, and I will set both of these to 400 by default. But another thing you could do is in your start function, which runs every time the object that the script is attached to is loaded in the scene. So I will say desired height equals screen divided by 2. So now screen dot width divided by 2. So now the desired width is always 1/2 of the screen width. You can do that. I don't want to. I want to set it to a static 400 by 400 value. Let me just leave that there and I will comment it out. And this is just something that you can do on your own. If you do desired height, it's the same exact thing, but screen.height. If you don't know what things are, I fully recommend looking it up online. The Unity docs are very good. The Unity forum is very good. And people on Stack Overflow are very rude, especially when it comes to new people who don't understand things. I've had so many accounts banned there when I started just because I asked a basic question and people didn't like that. But oh, I hate Stack Overflow. So you can also just press period and read through all of the different things. And if you hover over something, it will sometimes, depending on your Visual Studio Code, your text editor, it will sometimes tell you what it is. So this is a Boolean object where it equals another object. So this will tell you, does this object equal the object that you tell it? So if I can say, does screen equal this? And no, my screen is not this. It will always be false. Yeah, just read things if you don't know. That's a main thing how I learned. Videos such as this go out of date very fast. Hopefully this one is up to date by the time that you watch it, but it may need a few tweaks on things, and that's part of learning. Okay, so this is all about our image that we load. So I will create a region and I will call it image on load variables, and then let me just close this region with end region. And I love region because I can now collapse it and it doesn't take up a huge chunk of my screen. Now we need a few extra variables. We need an input field to retrieve the URL. So again, serialize field, and we will call this the input field, and I will call it the URL input field. Next, we want an image for our progress bar. So serialize field image progress bar image. Another thing that we can do is we can add a header so we can kind of see things, see what things are, and this will be the image on load variables. You'll see what header does when we open the Unity editor. Now let's add a header for this. We will call it the input field to retrieve image URL. And our last one, you don't need to do these, but they help not just you when you look at your code in another month or two, but it helps anyone you share your code with. There have been many times I've looked at my old projects which I didn't comment properly or comment at all, and I can spend 20 minutes wondering what this function or variable is for. And even if you use very normal names for things, it's easy to get your naming mixed up. Okay, and so for this we'll say the image to show loading progress. Okay. Now we want to create a few classes. First, we need an IEnumerator class. We can actually delete the update function if you want to, because I will not be using it. But now we need to create something called an IEnumerator. Make sure you get the enumerator and not the enumerable. An IEnumerator is very similar to the update function, where it will do something over time, and it's great for keeping things out of the update function and keeping things cleaner. They are a bit scary when you don't understand them, but after you do understand them, when I finally did understand them, I grew to love them, and I use them very often now. But okay, we'll call this IEnumerator, and we'll call it the get. Yes, let's go with load image from URL. And again, you can name it whatever you want. I want it to receive a string called URL when it is loaded. We are going to create a Unity web request, which will help us get our URL. And we're going to use it a few times, so we're going to actually create a variable for it. So start typing Unity web request, and the first time you type it out, just like with our image, Unity has no idea what we want, and so it's going to just give us a red squiggly line. It may even try to change what you type. Just make sure you type this, and then I will call this UWR for Unity web request. Now I'm actually going to click on it and do the control period, and we want it to say using Unity Engine Networking. I will left click on that, and we can see that it's popped up at the top up here. So now we have my Unity web request UWR, and we will set that to a Unity web request texture, which I can see by typing the first letter of every word, UWRT. And we will call this a get texture of the string URL. Okay, before we go any farther, let's add a few comments to this. Now, to add comments to your Unity, you want to do 3 double slashes, and with yours it may automatically generate this. With my other computer it does, because of the nice libraries that I have loaded onto it. Unfortunately, with this vanilla version it does not. So we do 3 double slashes and a less than symbol, and then the word summary, and then a greater than symbol. If you know HTML, this should look familiar. Another 3 double slash, another 3 slashes, and then another 3 slashes, and I will do one last slash in front of the less than. This means it's closed. Now, no matter what I type here, if I type test, when I hover over here, you can see that it says test right here. If I type nichthangaming.com and itch.io.nichthangaming, it will show it there. If you want to add new lines, you can do less than /br greater than, and you'll see that it puts them, at least it should have put them on a new line. But it's temperamental. But okay, for the summary, we are going to say a function that takes in a string URL and tries to set an image variable with the result. And if we hover over it, we can see that. For this, just to say, I'll do a double slash and I will say the basic web request. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to receive the async operation that we need to watch the progress. So the async operation variable, which is needed to view download progress. And this will be called the Unity Web Request Async Operation, which I can get by UWRAO. Or I've mistyped it and I still got it. And we'll call this the request. You can call it, again, whatever you want, as long as you have not used this name elsewhere. And we'll set it to the UWR.sendWebRequest. So to explain it to you, the UWR builds a function. It says, okay, use this function of getting a texture, which is kind of like an image, from this URL. It can be something on your local machine. It can be something from a website. It does not matter. I believe it can do your local machine. That's something that you would need to test. But it does not actually run the function yet. It has not said, go, let's start. What this says is this says start, begin downloading from the web. And we capture the loading inside of this request. And since it is an IEnumerator, it will run every frame, I suppose. Now, we want to go to our progress bar image and turn on our progress bar. So we will turn on the progress bar image. This is so we can view it while also keeping it hidden when we don't want to see it. If you're fine looking at the progress bar all of the time, you can keep it turned on. If you don't want it, then ignore this code. But we'll say progress bar image dot. Now this is an image, so we need to get the game object. So game object, make sure this is a lowercase g, not to be mistaken with an uppercase G, which will try to create a new game object or something like that. and then we do set active. And this is a method or function that we need to return true or false, a Boolean value. You can even do 1 equals 2, which will always be false. So I will just do true because I want it to turn on. It will now show. Now I want to update the progress bar while request is loading. So I will say while not request dot is done. So this says while request is done, which means we have fully loaded the image, and then not. So just the opposite. So if this is request is done, this is while the request is not done. Run the function inside of these brackets. And we are going to say the progress bar image dot fill amount. And we are going to set this to the request dot progress. With my Unity, there we go. So it's a float between 0 and 1. A float is a floating point number. So 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.555555. Or it can be 5.67, 3.14. While an int or integer like we have up here is a full whole number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it does not allow 0.12. So our fill amount is also a float from 0 to 1, with 1 being a completely full image and 0 being a completely empty image. And again, if you don't understand this, then keep watching and you should see later. Now we need to actually return from the function to wait until the next frame, so to say. So we will say yield return null because we don't want anything returned. You can even do yield return wait for seconds and say I want to wait 5 seconds before updating. Yield return new wait for seconds. So you can wait for 5 seconds before updating the progress image. You can do yield return 0.001f if you want to wait whatever that would be in seconds. 1/1000th of a second, I believe. Or you can do wait for end of frame, which will do the next frame. A frame is like when you're playing a video game and you have 60 FPS. This is frames per second. That means you see 60 images in 1 second. And it varies from computer to computer, but we don't need any of that fancy stuff. We'll just return null. Now, if we get here, that means that the image has finished loading, whether it's in error or not. So we can say image has finished loading and then check for success. So if I do a URL like www.google.com/hat image or something like that, maybe it will load an image of a hat. But if I do hat image, just the words hat image, then of course that's not a website. It does not link to a photo and it cannot load that. So we need to make sure that we handle the possibility that the thing that we enter is not an actual image. This will also cover the issue of if we are not connected to the internet, if the image is no longer valid. Like if you take something from Facebook, the links from Facebook are only valid for a few weeks or a month or so until Facebook actually refreshes them. But okay. And actually before this, let's say image has finished loading. Turn off progress bar. We don't need the progress bar anymore because we are now going to display the image or display an error. So I'll say set active as false. Now we want to actually check if success. So now we say check for success, and I will say if the UWR.result does not equal to Unity web request all the way down here dot result success. Oh, exactly what we want. So if the result is not a success, then we need to debug.log error. So we will show an error on the screen, the UWR.error. And we will have one more function, which we will put down here, void image finished loading bool, I believe bool success. The void return type means that we do not want to receive any information from this class. And actually, yes. So now we will run this function, image finished loading, and we will say false. The image finished loading is not in success. Okay. And there is another thing that you can do to help your IntelliSense, where we can specify the parameter to tell us what it is for. So 1, 2, 3, we say param name equals success slash param. And of course this may be automatically created for you on your machine, but on this current machine I do not have the libraries to automatically generate it. Now we will say if the image has loaded successfully or not. And when we hover over success, we see a short little snippet of what it is to kind of tell us what to type. Okay, so now let's go back here into our load image from URL. Now we have if this happens, otherwise or else do this. So if this, do this, else do this. Now we want to create a texture from the downloaded results. So create a texture 2D from the Unity web request. And for this we will say texture 2D texture equals, and we need some brackets here, so we will say download handler texture right here, and it will be UWR dot download handler. So this converts our download handler to a download handler texture dot texture. And converting is, say I have float a equals 2.2f, and then I want to assign it to an integer, so I say int b equals a. Well, I get an error because you cannot create a whole number 1, 2, 3, 4 with a number that's with a decimal 2.2, 2.3, 100.1. So what we need to do is we need to, just like this, say what we want to convert it to. In this case, we will cast it to an integer, and it will round down or round up. And in this case, I believe it would round down. Now, that is a very simplistic version of what's happening here. We're converting a download handler to a download handler texture. And all of this stuff is handled by the machine, so you don't need to worry too much about it. But feel free to go to Google if you want to know more. Now we need to create a sprite to add to the image. So it's a big chicken and egg thing here. We have an image. On our images, as you will see later, they have sprites. Now a sprite is made up of a texture, a rect transform, and a pivot point. And that's a bit complicated, so you'll just see. So now we will create a sprite from the texture. And when you think of sprite, think of something like an image, like a little fairy flying around, and not the soda. So we'll say sprite equals capital S sprite dot capital C create. And you can see we need a texture 2D, we need a rect transform, a pivot. You can look through all of those to see what exactly you want to add. So we will add our texture, then a new rect of 0, 0. This means it's in the very center. Then we need texture dot width for the width, and texture dot height for the height. Finally, we need to set the pivot point, which I want to set to a vector 2.0. And finally, we closed it off, and we've created a new sprite. Of course, the sprite has not been assigned to any objects. It's just kind of floating in the memory of the computer and not displaying on the screen yet. And what we want to do is we want to display on the screen. And before we can display on the screen, we actually need to set up a few variables to make sure that it displays within the space that we say it can display. So we will create a region for sprite display variable creation area, which kind of explains what we will be doing here. That way we can collapse this and you'll know exactly what's going on here. And actually out here, let's just say the sprite display variables. First, we want a float width, which we will set to the texture dot width. And actually, let's do this. Let's do this up here since we're using it, and instead we'll just call this width and height. We will have height, which will equal texture dot height. We will have a width, sub, which is the subtraction value that we will subtract from our width, and I want it to set it to a default value of 1, and we'll have a height sub, which is a subtraction value for the height, which we set to a default value of 1. Now you can see I only had to type float once, and then I can use a comma to create a new thing. So this says, okay, you want a width, a width sub, and a height sub. So you don't need to type float equals this, semicolon, float equals this, semicolon. But you do want to use that with your variables up here, otherwise they will display weird in the Unity editor. But we can still use this just fine. Okay, now let's go over here to our region where we will start to manipulate these variables. So first we need to see, is the width greater than the height? So we will say if width is greater than height, then we want to say the width sub is equal to the width divided by the height. You'll see what we use this for later. Then we say else if the height is greater than the width. The final option would be if the height equals the width, and if so, then we just want it set to 1, so we don't need to do a final else. So we'll say the opposite, so height sub equals height divided by width. Finally, we want to reduce the image width and height until it fits inside of our desired width and height. So again, we need another while loop. So while the width is greater than the desired width, or, which is used by the two standing up lines above the enter, it means or, if this is true, or if this is true, do this. Or the height is greater than the desired height. So if either our width or our height is too big, we need to do this, which is the width will subtract from the width equals the width minus. The minus equals means this minus this. Minus the width sub, and the height minus equals the height sub. And that's why we need this here. This ensures that our ratio stays the same. So let's add that. These methods ensure that our image ratio does not change. Okay, now we've got the width and the height, and we can close this. And finally, we want to set the image. So we now need to access our image rect, which is right here. This is the rect transform of our image. We can either set it in editor or in start. We'll do it here. So we'll say image rect dot size delta. You use size delta to change the size of a rect transform. And we will say this equals a new vector 2 from our width and height, our x and y. This sets the image size. Next, we want to assign the sprite to the image so it can be viewed on the canvas, so we will do the oh golly, what do we call it? That variable? We call it the place image on load. So place image on load dot sprite will equal our sprite. And finally, we want to load the image finished loading. Image finished loading function, and yes, it was a success, so we say true. This is something that we run after the IEnumerator has finished, telling us that everything is done. Now, at this moment, I don't want anything to run, any buttons to pop up, anything like that to show either or. So instead, I'm just going to print a simple message to the console. But here is where you know that the image has finished running and you can do whatever you want. But that's out of the scope of this quick little tutorial. So if success, I'm just going to print image loaded successfully. Else, so if the image is not loaded successfully, I will print there was an error loading the image. See console above for more details. And of course, these are just logs which are being printed to the console. This is the same as debug.log, which you may need to use if you don't have print. And it just prints it to the console. Okay, I believe that's everything that we need from our script. We do actually need one more thing which will run everything. So let's go. I like to put it right here between start and the image from URL. And I will call this a public void, meaning anything can access this function, but it will not return any data. Public void input field edit end, telling me that this will run once the input field is done editing, or once the user has finished editing in the input field. So first we need to get our URL, which we'll get from the URL input field, URL input field dot text, to get the text value of that input field. Finally, next, let's actually print the URL for debugging purposes, and just to make sure that we are getting what we expect to get. Next, we say if not, so the opposite of whatever we say in here. So if the string is null or white space, pretty much white space includes spaces, tabs, things like that, and null refers to nothing. Null is different than empty, but the distinction between them is very blurred. But white space refers to there are just space bars entered or tab and no actual characters. So if the string is null or white space, and we need to say which string do we want to check for being null or white space, which is URL. And of course the not means it is not null and it is not white space. Then we want to say start coroutine of the load image from URL using the URL. You must use start coroutine to start an IEnumerator function. You cannot just take this and run it like a normal function. So you can't just do this. As you see, okay, there's no issue, but it won't actually load. You need to use the start coroutine. And yeah, that was one big chunk of our script. So now let's go back to the editor. We're going to build a very basic interface. We're going to assign all of the values to our script object, and then we're going to do some basic testing. So now I'm back in my Unity screen, and we're waiting for it to finish kind of reloading the script. It needs to say, oh hey, what have you changed here? And now we can see a lot of changes made to the load image from URL script. The first thing I want to do is create a canvas and an image. The easiest way that I know of to create a canvas is to right-click and create a part of a canvas, and then you get the canvas and the event system right away. So I will right-click, go to UI, and image. Now you see I have a canvas, image, and event system. If you want to track events in your program, such as clicks on the screen, maybe even keyboard presses. I don't know about keyboard presses, I think you can do that, but definitely clicks on the canvas, you must have an event system. You also can only have one event system per scene, so if you're moving around scenes, make sure that you only have one event system, or you assign it as a child of a canvas that you are dragging from scene to scene with a do not destroy on load script. But that's, of course, outside of the scope of this. Now we want to assign a name to this, so image to display loaded URL. And let's click on the canvas and press F. I'm actually going to go to my game and change it from free aspect to, I want it to have a phone graphics, which I don't have, mostly because I'm set up in my Windows Max Linux version. But I'm just going to quickly add this, and I will call it 1080 by 1920 fixed resolution, 1080 by 1920, click OK, and now you can see I have a generic phone size. I'm also going to drag this over here so I can see my game scene and my scene. I will now click on Canvas, move my mouse over to the scene area, and press the F key twice. One will zoom you in way too far, the other one will show the whole image. Now I will click on my image to load, and I will click on this part with the lines. I will hold Alt and Shift, and I will click on this top bar. What this does is it moves it to the very top. It sets the pivot point and the anchors to the top of the object, to the very top middle of the object. Now I want to move it down, let's say negative 100. You need to say negative because positive would move you up, of course. The width does not matter because we are setting it from the script, but we'll look at the script right now. Actually, let's right click and create empty, and we'll call this the load image from URL script. Now we need to go to assets, scripts, and drag this onto the object. Make sure that this is the one selected. If you're having trouble, you can click the lock. Alternatively, you can do add component and type load image from URL script, like this. Now we see that the desired width and height is 400 by 400, so just to imagine what that looks like, we can enter those values here, and this is about what it's going to look like. If you wanted it 700 by 700, you can do that as well. Just change these width and heights. And this is what header does, is it gives you this little information about it. And this is what serialized field does is it displays it. If you have it as private, you cannot see this. And if you wanted to see it here, edit it here, and edit it from other scripts, then you should use public. But it's just good practice to use as few public variables as possible. Okay, so now we have the image. Next we need our loading bar image. So I'll right click on canvas, which will create whatever thing I create here as a child of the canvas. I will go to UI, and again I will click image, and I will call this the progress bar image. I'm fine with it being where it is. I'm fine with it being 100 by 100. In fact, we can even change it to 200 by 200. It does not matter. What matters is the source image. Let's just try and go with this knob and see if we can change it to filled. Yes. So I'm just using the default Unity knob, so we don't need to load anything. I will do radial 360 from the top, which you can see this is what our progress bar will look like. You can even do horizontal, which will fill up the screen from left to right. So if I set the width to something ridiculous like 700, then you can see that it loads like the typical loading bar. And you can kind of play with it like that. As for moving something along, that's something for you to play with as well, but that would need some more things through the script. But anyways, I'm going to do radial 360 from the top, and I'm going to keep the aspect as 200 by 200. Again, this does not matter. Whatever you say. You can also do clockwise or counterclockwise. I kind of like counterclockwise. Let's do that one. And preserve aspect if you want, but I will just do this. So image of a knob, filled, radial 360, top, fill amount we will be setting through the script, and I will actually click this button here to turn off the image. This is the image.gameObject.set active true and false that we are using in the script. Finally, we want to add our input field. So UI, and let's go with, we want to try, okay, in legacy input field. I usually avoid the input field TextMesh Pro because it does install extra things to your screen, but it looks like in 2021 text input field has been depreciated and put into legacy, so I'll use TextMesh Pro. For this, I do need to import the essentials to use TextMesh Pro, so this is a one-time importing, and we'll see them pop up in our assets folder. And the only difference between TextMesh Pro and normal input field is they are simple. You can even view some TextMesh Pro examples and extras to see what exactly you can do. Because we are using a TextMesh Pro in this example, I believe we do need to change this from input field to input field TextMesh Pro. But we will see how that works. Okay. Now for this, let's actually go up to the top in our rect transform with our input field selected, and I want to move it all the way down to the bottom, and I'll even select this one right here. I want to set the height to 300, give us a good thing, put it about 50 up, and let's give it a padding of 50 on the left and 50 on the right. Next, I want to say that my TextMesh Pro input field let's see, you can say content type standard, yes, because we don't want a password or a website. Our line type, I want to do a multi-line submit, just so you can have many lines. Otherwise, when you display something on the screen like this, it will load it from left to right. This one you can view this chunk, this chunk, this chunk. And it makes it easier to look at a long string of text, such as a URL that can have 100 or so characters at the end of it. The caret blink rate is that flashing line when you click on text, and the width is how big it is. You can set the selection color, but the thing that we want is on end edit, which means when you click outside of the box, or if it's single line when you click the enter or submit button. So we'll add to that, and we want to drag the load image from URL script onto this little thing here. If you have trouble with it, you can click the lock to stop this screen from changing. You could also just type this button and type load image from URL script right here, but I'm just going to drag it over. Then I will click on no function, load image from URL script, and we want to find that input field end edit right here, and this will run the function every time. That's about all we need for that. Then we have our text area over here, and we have our placeholder and text. I actually want to highlight both of those, and we can say that the font size can be bold. I always like to embolden things. And the font size, let's actually raise it higher, set it to black. Let's see, does our placeholder? Yes, our placeholder does have text. Let's see what it takes to view that. It has no. Let's see, why can't we view our text? It is possible. Okay, we're getting some issue here with our TextMesh Pro, of course. TextMesh Pro has always been very glitchy. You can even try auto size. It may even be possible that we cannot view it outside of play. So let's just try to play it, see what we see in editor. It will need to reload the script assemblies, and if we have trouble, I'm just going to remove the TextMesh Pro and go with the legacy. Okay, so it looks like our issue was just with TextMesh Pro not displaying things outside of play, which happens with materials. I do dislike that, but I know how to get around it. So I'm going to edit the font size, and I think I want it to be, let's just go with an 80. Okay, I will write that down, and once we end this, I will set it to an 80, and instead of enter text, I'm going to say enter URL, and that's what it will show. As for the text, I think I will use an 80 font as well. Okay, so let's turn it off. All of our changes will be thrown away because we are in play mode. We'll set it to AT. Instead of enter text, it will say enter URL. And for our text size as well, we're going to set that to an 80. Okay, before we continue, because we did make a last-minute change, because the Unity 2021 has turned the input field to legacy, meaning it will be depreciated soon and should not be used anymore. We are now using the input field Text Mesh Pro, which is a more advanced version and different from input field. So we actually need to go back to our text and change our URL input field to a TMP input field. To do that, we click here in front of input field, type TMP underscore input field. And of course that will give us an error because we're using the Unity Engine UI and not the TMP Pro. So Control and period and using TMP Pro up here. Now we can save this. Getting the value should still work just fine. Let's go back. We need to reload the script again, and you'll see this input field change to TMP input field. Okay, and everything's loaded. It's now showing TMP input field, and we are finally able to drag things into place. Our progress bar image, make sure that it is turned off if you want. And our image to display loaded URL will go here, and we will also drag it again here to get the image rect. You don't need to drag things here. You can have everything be retrieved on start, but that will take longer for the game to start, and no one wants that. So now I will save everything, and I will go to the internet to grab an image. Okay, so I've just Googled my company on Google, and I'm going to load one of my images into it. I'm actually very surprised to see a lot of my work in a Google search. So I'll click on this image. I want to load this small little 150 by 150 logo. So I will right click and I will copy image address. Then I will, let's actually move this over so I can do the play maximized. Now when I play it, the game will maximize and everything else will go away. We can of course still see the console down here. So nothing's here, nothing's here. I click here to enter the URL, and once I click away, we see it. It shows up right away and it's at the right size. Now what if I were to load something large? So let's go back here and let's search for a large image. And then we can start clicking on the images, and if I hover over it, I see this image is 462 pixels by 280. That's far too small. 1920 by 1080, that's a good start. If we can get something like a 40K, that would be even better. So let's do that, large image 4K. That means it will take a very long time for this to load. If we can find one, oh, here we go. 3,840 pixels by 2,160. So I will go down to copy link address. This should load pretty long. Now, as you saw, my image loaded successfully. We are loading the GitHub avatar, and we didn't see the loading screen at all, just because I loaded the 150 by 150 pixels in less than a frame. So now we are loading this image from Google, and when I click off, it should load for quite a while. So now I'm clicking off, and there is an image loading. So see the download handler error. That might be something to add. So Let's go back here and let's try to open the image in a new tab. It looks like there is a trouble copying the image address. Let's copy it again. And now we see the JPG at the end, which means this is probably better. Okay, here's our loading bar, and now we can see it. And it's shrunk to our 400 by 400 size. If we keep the same thing, but here we say it is, go right up to the edge of 900 by 900. And we play it. So this means our desired width and desired height are now going to be 900 by 900 pixels. Let's enter it and click off, and it loaded pretty fast that time, and there is our new image. That's how you can load images. There are many things you can do with it. I'm not covering how to save this new image, but that is also a possibility of saving the image from a URL. I'm sure there are many apps that you can create now that you have the ability, and I will upload the code to my GitHub so you can view it there as well. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped you, and goodbye.